I'm here with your fantasy football week 1 quarterback start sits and maybe a couple cautions. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. We have finally made it to week 1. And in this particular position group, well, we've already had some of the ballers play. Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes on Thursday night. Friday night, we saw Jalen Hurts. Those three right there should have been 3 of the top 4 quarterbacks drafted in just about all your leagues. And he went up against a Jordan Love, who is a solid player. So who does that leave us with for Sunday and Monday? Well, I'm starting C.J. Stroud of the Texans. You know, he balled out last year. He's going up against an Indianapolis team, which I think this game is just going to be a shootout, points galore. And on top of that, they added Joe Mixon and Stephon Diggs. I'm also starting Detroit quarterback Jared Goff. The Rams are going to be without Aaron Donald, and he's got the weapons. They proved it last year, and I think everybody's expecting much of the same out of the Detroit offense. Sitting Dak Prescott. I've never been a huge Dak Prescott fan myself. I understand he's a good quarterback, and he puts up great fantasy numbers, but the Browns are probably a top 5 defense, top 10 defense for sure, probably a top 5 defense. I'm also shying away from Aaron Rodgers. He's fresh off the injuries, and he's going up against the 49ers, so there's enough said there. I'm throwing caution to Brock Purdy. I know I've been a big Brock Purdy homer, and I say he's got all the weapons, but he's coming up against the Jets defense, which in my opinion, and many other people's opinion, is the top defense in the league. Last but not least, caution to Caleb Williams. I know there's been a ton of hype around him. He is the next generational talent at this position. But in the preseason, he only went 10 for 20, and he's coming up against a Tennessee defensive coordinator, Denard Williams, who is blitz happy. So we'll have to see how he handles that.
These are my starts and sits at wide receiver. Start Amari Cooper. This is a revenge game for Cooper versus former team who traded him to Cleveland for basically nothing. He has the best chemistry of any Browns wide receiver with Deshaun Watson, and Deron Bland is out for the Cowboys, who led the league in interceptions last season. Sit Tyler Lockett. He is questionable to play, but even if he does suit up and play the whole game, I don't love the matchup. The Broncos played good defense down the stretch last season, and Jackson Smith and Jigba should have a bigger role this year. Start Jamison Williams. The game has the highest over-under of any game for the week, and there should be plenty of points to go around. I would also be locking Cooper Kupp into my lineup as well. Sit Calvin Ridley. He's probably fine as a flex this week, but I expect him to be a boomer bust player all season, and this is a very tough matchup versus a very good Bears secondary. Start Andre Iosivas. If you're in a bind already at wide receiver in week 1, Iosivas could be a good play. He should be in for a big role this week as T. Higgins is doubtful and Jamar Chase's status is still up in the air. Iosivas has looked good when he's received playing time. He's tall and athletic and should outperform his projection. And finally, sit Brandon Ayuk. I wouldn't actually sit him, but I also don't expect him to have a big game. He was out a lot of the offseason due to a contract dispute and has a very tough matchup versus the Jets secondary. So, again, in real life, he's probably not a sit, but don't expect a monster performance.
I like Gus Edwards this week in week 1 against the Las Vegas Raiders. The Raiders ranked in the bottom half of the NFL in rushing defense last year, and they ranked top 10 in getting to the passer. So new head coach John Harbaugh, he likes to run the ball, and Gus Edwards is familiar with Greg Roman's offensive scheme from their time together in Baltimore. Considering all that, I like Edwards to get at least 15 touches and over 60 yards, and he should be able to put up a touchdown as he's the unquestioned goal line back for the Chargers, and he scored 13 touchdowns a year ago in Baltimore. Start Ramondre Stevenson against the Bengals. Last season, the Bengals gave up 4.7 yards per carry and 17 rushing touchdowns as a team. And with this being Jacoby Brissett's first game in New England, they're likely going to try to minimize his impact on the game's outcome. And they're going to utilize short passing and running to try to control the clock. And that bodes well for Stevenson to see plenty of usage, not just as a runner, but as a receiver out of the backfield as well. Kenneth Walker has a juicy matchup against the Denver Broncos in week 1. The Broncos gave up a league high 5 yards per carry last season, and while they did address their D-line in free agency and draft this offseason, it's going to take them more than 1 week to gel and come together as a unit. I would sit David Montgomery against the Rams. The Rams were above average against the run last season, and they added 2 players in the draft with their first 2 picks at the D-line position, Jared Verse and Brandon Fisk from Florida State. And so I think with that added depth and their performance last year, Montgomery is definitely a sit when you consider his timeshare with Jahmyr Gibbs. I would sit Najee Harris versus the Falcons. The Falcons were one of the better teams at stopping the run in 2023, and Harris is coming off his season where he saw his carries hit a career low. Jalen Warren's also going to take reps away from Harris as well, so I think he's a risky play in week one. And finally, I'd sit DeAndre Swift in week one against the Titans. The Titans had the best yards per carry average as a defense last season, only surrendering 3.8 yards per attempt. This combined with Swift being in a new offense means it might be safer to keep him on the bench this week.
I'm looking at the tight ends. So, tight ends for you start in the top tier. Trey McBride and Don Kincaid for almost the exact same reason, and they're in a game against each other. Against Buffalo, their secondary is not as strong as it's been in years past, and Trey McBride should be the clear number two catching option. It'll be interesting to see if he's number one while Marvin Harrison kind of adjusts to the NFL. Next, we have Dalton Kincaid for the exact same reasons, except Stephon Diggs is gone, and again, Arizona's defense is so. Now, mid tier people to look to either add off the waiver wire or start. Cole Kmet against the Titans with Keenan Allen's foot injury and the Bears being much improved, and Cole Kmet's definitely a good tight end to look to start and stream. Finally, if you're needing someone off the waiver wire, Tyler Conklin. Aaron Rodgers knows how to use a good tight end, and Conklin's always been a sleeper. Last season, for the last half of the season, he was definitely a viable option to start. So those are a few tight ends for you to start and pick up off the waiver wire. Next, the sits at tight end. The top tier one that we're going to recommend sitting is going to be George Kittle against a fantastic Jets defense. Kittle also does a lot of blocking and dirty work, so look for him to be doing that to help open up the rest of the offense for the 49ers. David Njoku, most of his production last season, and it was a really good breakout year, but it was with Joe Flacco. He's never really shown much chemistry with any of the other quarterbacks, and him and Flacco just really connected, but he's never been on the same page with Deshaun Watson. Finally, the Raiders. I would not start any of their tight ends. I know Brock Bowers is supposed to be a generational talent, but the Raiders didn't seem to know how to use their very good rookie tight end last year. So wait to see how that plays out with the Raiders. So those are a few tight ends for you to start and sit. Here are a couple of quick defenses for you to stream this week and pick up off the waiver wire. First up, the Bengals versus the Patriots. The Bengals are available in 28% leagues. I'm expecting anyone that plays the Patriots this season to be the top streaming option, so we will see how that goes. Next, the Seattle Seahawks. They open up against Denver and New England, so they have a pretty soft opening, and they're available in 61% of leagues. Finally, if you're looking for a deeper team because everyone's gone off your waiver wire, the Falcons versus the Pittsburgh Steelers. Russell Wilson's questionable. Fields is new to the system and still young, and it has an improving Falcons team available to take some of the pressure off their defense, and they're available in 88% of leagues. So hopefully these defenses help you win.